Today we are tackling a huge question, one that gets to the very heart of how we think about history and faith. It's a story of shared gods, who, believe it or not, ended up as demons. It's a story of spiritual quests that, some argue, were really about tax collection. And it's a story of how empires can shape our ideas of eternity itself. So let's get right into it. We're looking at Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, and Judaism. These are absolute pillars of human belief, with traditions going back thousands of years. And at first glance, you'd say they're worlds apart, right? But what if, deep down in the archaeological and linguistic record, they spring from a common source? That's what we're going to investigate, following the evidence wherever it leads. So, where does this story even begin? Well, the consensus among scholars is that there is a profound connection here, but maybe not for all three. The evidence points to a shared root, but only for two of these faiths. And to find it, we have to go way back, about 4,000 years ago, to the vast, windswept grasslands of the Eurasian steppes.
What you're seeing here is a map of a journey, not just over land, but of ideas. Archaeologists have uncovered this incredible Bronze Age society called the Santashta culture. They had fortified settlements and, this is key, they had spoke-wheeled chariots. This was the homeland of a people we now call the Proto-Indo-Iranians. Around 1900 BCE, this group started to split up. One branch, the Indic peoples, headed southeast into South Asia. They brought with them the oral traditions that would eventually become the Vedas, which are, the foundational texts of Hinduism. The other branch, the Iranians, moved south onto the Iranian plateau, and their beliefs formed the basis for what would become Zoroastrianism. So the big takeaway here is this. Before Hinduism, before Zoroastrianism, there was this common ancestral culture.
And if you want the smoking gun for that shared ancestry, it's right here, in the language. These are not just words that sound kinda similar. These are what linguists call cognates. They're like linguistic fossils that prove a direct shared heritage. So both traditions had a concept of cosmic order, Rita in Sanskrit, Asha in Avestan, from the exact same root word. They both had a sacred ritual drink, Soma and Hama, again from a common root. But look at those last two rows. This is where it gets absolutely fascinating. The word for divine beings, Deva in Sanskrit, becomes the Avestan word for demons, Dayava, and the reverse is true. Asura, which often means demon in later Hinduism, is the Avestan word for the highest divine lords, the Ahura. This perfect flip isn't a coincidence. It's the calling card of a schism, a kind of religious divorce, where one side's gods literally became the other's devils.
Okay, so we've established that two of these faiths shared a common starting line. But from that point on, all three forged their own radically different paths. They were shaped by everything from geography and war to prophets and philosophers. So let's trace how each one evolved. Hinduism's story is just one of incredible absorption and synthesis. Its deepest roots might even predate the Vedic period, possibly tying back to the Great Indus Valley civilization. Then, starting around 1500 BCE, you get the Vedic period, which was all about the hymns and rituals of the Rig Veda. But then, a massive philosophical shift happens with the Upanishads. The focus turns inward to these huge concepts of a universal soul, Brahman, and the individual self, Atman. Over the next 1,000 years, it just kept growing, absorbing local traditions, giving us epic stories like the Mahabharata, and developing these powerful devotional movements. It was never just one straight line. It's always been more like a vast, flowing river of beliefs.
Now, Zoroastrianism's path was really defined by one revolutionary moment, a reform. The prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, took that old Indo-Iranian pantheon and completely reframed it as this dramatic cosmic struggle between a wise creator, Ahura Mazda, and a destructive spirit, Angra Mainyu. This was a radical call to moral choice. The faith grew to become the official religion of powerful Persian empires, but then it faced a near-total collapse after the Islamic conquest of Persia. This forced its followers to scatter, and many, who became known as the Parsis, found a safe haven in India, where a small but incredibly resilient community still thrives today.
And that brings us to Judaism, which has a completely separate origin story. It didn't come from the steppes, it grew out of the ancient lands of Canaan. And in its earliest days, the worship of its god, Yahweh, existed in a polytheistic world. In fact, we have archaeological evidence suggesting Yahweh even had a divine partner, a goddess named Asherah. The real turning point, the moment that changed everything for Judaism, was the Babylonian exile in 586 BCE. The temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, and the elites were carted off to Babylon, which just so happened to be the heart of the Persian Empire. This is where strict monotheism really cements itself, and it's where Judaism comes into direct, sustained contact with Zoroastrianism, and you start to see ideas like a cosmic adversary, resurrection, and a final judgment enter into Jewish thought. It wasn't just a minor influence, it was a catalyst that reshaped its entire theology.
So, up to this point, we've been telling a story of spiritual and cultural development. But what if there's a completely different way to read all this? One of our sources for this explainer throws a real curveball. It suggests an interpretation that challenges the very idea of faith itself and reframes it as something much more, well, practical.
This is the core idea from a source called the Institute for Historical Truth Recovery. And the argument is basically this: religion isn't primarily about spirituality. It's a form of social technology. Think of it like an operating system designed by the ruling class to solve very real-world problems: how to justify taxes, how to manage diverse populations you've just conquered, and how to enforce social order. From this perspective, every sacred ritual and divine story has a hidden administrative purpose.
Here is a perfect example of how this theory works. It takes the theological claims made in religious texts and puts them right up against the hard, material evidence from archaeology. So, the traditional story says Judaism was founded on this unique, radical idea of one God. But this viewpoint points to evidence like the Kuntulit Ajud inscriptions from around 800 BCE. And these inscriptions repeatedly ask for a blessing from Yahweh and his Asherah. This strongly suggests that for the early Israelites, God was worshipped alongside a female consort, just like pretty much every other deity in the region. The material fact, this theory argues, totally contradicts the later theological story.
Okay, this slide is really the engine room of that whole administrative argument. Let's walk through it. It links every big religious idea to a concrete, practical problem. First, the need: funding expensive chariot warfare on the steppes. The innovation? The Vedic ritual of yajna, or sacrifice, which this theory claims was basically a ritualized tax system. The proof? At the Sintashta site of Archaeum, archaeologists found a nearly 1-to-1 ratio of fire altars to chariot workshops. Second need: the Persian Empire had to audit tribute from all its conquered nations. The innovation? Asha, the Zoroastrian idea of cosmic order, is reframed as an imperial compliance system. And the proof? Tablets found at Persepolis that literally record grain payments made to priests. Finally, the need to manage tax revenue from the Jewish community in Babylon. The innovation: codifying the Torah to create a legal and financial framework. And the proof? The Marashu archive, which details Judeans working as official tax farmers for the empire. So we've just laid out two completely different ways of understanding this history, using the exact same set of facts. One is a story of prophets and philosophers searching for ultimate meaning, and the other is a story of priests and scribes basically managing spreadsheets. Let's put them side by side one last time and figure out what this all means.
So what have we really seen? On the one hand, there's a story of spiritual evolution. It's a powerful narrative of an ancient culture giving birth to two sibling faiths, which are then reshaped by the vision of Zarathustra, the deep philosophy of the Upanishads, and the incredible resilience of the Jewish people in exile. It's history driven by the human search for meaning. But on the other hand, we have this story of administrative control. In this version, faith is just a mask for function. It's a brutally practical technology, an operating system for power that was invented, tweaked, and updated over centuries to better extract resources and control people.
And that leaves us with this final, really provocative question. When we look at the origins of belief, are we seeing the discovery of timeless, transcendent truths? Or are we looking at the perfection of a system of social control? A bureaucracy so effective, so powerful that has outlasted every single empire that ever existed. You know, maybe the truth isn't a simple choice between the two. Maybe the spiritual quest and the need for social order have always been tangled up together, each one shaping the other in a complex dance that's still going on today. The evidence can be read both ways. And maybe the answer just lies in where you choose to put your focus, on the spirit or on the system. Thanks for joining me.